Welcome to the Intellectual Freedom Podcast. Here we analyze politics, culture, technology, personal growth and development, and society at large through the lens of critical thinking and open-mindedness, not demagoguery and partisan hyperbole. I'm Dr. David Hopkins, humanities professor, your host and guide. So without further delay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I have a great guest here I've been waiting for. I'm so pumped to have on with us. You know, I love to talk about health, and all of you that listen know my health journey from very sick and overweight to losing 45 pounds after an ER visit back in July of 2020. And just the incredible revitalization, not just physically, but mentally. And so I am a huge believer in the mind, body, spirit, philosophy. We have to address all aspects of ourselves to be our best self. But for me, I know I had to get my body right to get my mind right. And so this conversation is so important. And I have with me today, Mr. Ben Tanner. He is a medical professional, a physician assistant, and he's worked in emergency medicine, urgent care, and family practice. He's actually made himself a sort of an expert in the field here of fasting, and as going all the way back to 2016, he started developing an interest in various forms of fasting and using these techniques to improve not only his own health, but helping friends, family, and his patients to do the same. So I am incredibly pleased to have you on the podcast today. So let's just dispense with some of the formalities. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and your journey that has you here on my podcast here today?
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for that introduction. So, I grew up in Missouri, and maybe that's going back too far, so I'll jump ahead. But So after college, I actually initially went to podiatric medical school, or podiatry school, as it's sometimes called. And I did that for a few years. So that was to become a foot and ankle doctor. But after a while, eventually, I decided to switch career paths. So I did that for a few years, actually did a lot of what we call the clinical rotations there in podiatry school. And so that was where I really started to get some kind of close-up, hands-on experience in the medical field. But eventually I decided to switch and become a physician assistant instead, or a PA. And so I started PA school in 2011, graduated in 2013, and then I started working in the emergency room. And I did some part-time work in family practice and urgent care. And I guess one thing I should mention that I kind of skipped over quickly is when I was in both, sometimes I just call it medical school because we took mostly the same classes as the medical students in podiatric medical school. So when I was in med school and PA school, of course, we had those biochemistry classes, those physiology classes, and then those other more kind of medical classes. And I learned a lot about various things, and I developed an interest in nutrition. But in retrospect, they didn't teach us that much about nutrition, and the stuff they were teaching us was kind of a few decades behind the times.
Wow.
More or less, is kind of how I would look at it in retrospect. And then once I started working as a PA, it was a few years later. So in 2016, a couple of years after I'd started working, that I stumbled onto a few videos and podcasts and later books that kind of filled in a lot of those gaps and kind of helped me connect what I had learned previously during my schooling to kind of what I was seeing in the real world and my own personal experience. And it just kind of all came together. And one of those things I learned about was fasting, how it's really an ancient practice, but it started to become more popular in the modern environment. For a few decades there, we were told that we needed to eat all the time, small, frequent meals. That was kind of the dogma. And that was never really based on any good research, extremely limited research that would support that at all. And it turns out it was a terrible idea to eat all the time. And it basically tends to make people fatter, sicker, give them diabetes, etc., especially if it's processed snacks, processed food that most people eat these days. So that kind of sort of almost takes us to the present, other than the fact that you already mentioned, alluded to the fact that I started a website about fasting, and got really focused on it, did a lot of research and And I don't really use the word expert, but I've learned a lot about it. I've learned a
Right.
lot about it, and
Right.
have some things to share. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, don't worry about being from Missouri. I was born and raised in Iowa, so I come from that neck of the woods up
Oh,
there
is that
too.
right? Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
cool.
I've been down in Florida a long time, but
Midwest
yep,
connection.
born and
Right.
raised up there. So yeah, it's fascinating, the nutrition aspect in colleges, because when I went through all the stuff I was going through, I was reading and researching, and it's it was amazing when you see documentaries from doctors who literally almost never study nutrition. It's like it would seem like that should be almost a cornerstone of studies to understand how the human body operates efficiently on food and the things we put in it. But you're not the first time I've heard that story, that a lot of times that just is not very present inside of the traditional university walls.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very limited. The amount of time we spent on nutrition in both of those schoolings was pretty limited, and the stuff that we were learning was a little outdated, as I mentioned. Yeah.
That's just crazy, crazy. So I think I read somewhere that over 60% of chronic health disease, it's preventable, meaning if you get your diet, your exercise, making healthy lifestyle choices, that sort of stuff, limited drinking, cutting out smoking, all these things can actually help prevent death in a huge number. But what have you found as some of the big health problems, just from your own practice and working with patients, what you're eating, that are the biggest problems in America that intermittent fasting or fasting might be able to help with?
Yeah. So I recently heard a term, diabesity.
Mm-hmm.
So of course it's kind of a melding of diabetes and obesity,
Right,
but
right.
it kind of refers to a spectrum that affects more than half of American adults.
Half.
More, yeah,
Wow.
greater than 50%. Some
That's
estimates as high as
crazy.
80% of this spectrum, and the spectrum is what we would kind of call pre-diabetes, which includes something called insulin resistance. So when your body's making too much insulin and it doesn't work as well, and we can talk more about that, of course. So you've got
Right.
your insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, to diabetes, and of course the obesity that often goes along with either pre-diabetes or diabetes. So that's kind of a spectrum, and it literally affects more than half of adults in the United States. So I so in terms of like what health problems I see, um, much of it falls under that umbrella. So, of course, working in the emergency room, we see all sorts of stuff, but it's just remarkable how many of those cases, how often the person who's affected, is either significantly overweight or has high blood sugar. Now it's like every other patient is like, oh yeah, and I was told I have diabetes or pre-diabetes or any combination of things. And then there are a whole bunch of other medical conditions or chronic medical illnesses that stem from that same root of the insulin resistance and diabetes and obesity. So it's kind of this, I don't know, this tree where that's the trunk and there's all these different things that kind of branch off of it. So I mean, I see everything under the sun, whether it's they come in for an infection on their leg or a blood clot in their leg, or of course there's the
Right.
recent COVID context,
Oh, sure.
where people
Absolutely.
with those types of metabolic issues, the diabetes, the obesity, were at much, much higher risk of having serious disease with COVID, and still are. I mean, I was using past tense there for a second, but
Right, right, right,
continue to
right.
be at much higher risk of having a serious case, a life-threatening type of case from COVID-19. So that's recent context, but everything like heart attacks and strokes and even certain abdominal problems, et cetera, lots of skin problems that are just more likely among those people. So all the things that we see kind of skew that way to some extent.
Right. Yeah, that was me. Abdominal. I was in with gastrointestinal. I was in once and I had a blockage, and that was a horrific surgery. They cut my abdomen from almost the top to the bottom and got the blockage out. And then this last July, I was back again after it took like 8, 9 months to heal from that stupid surgery. But I went right back to my old lifestyle, which was terrible. I was working all the time. I was eating all the garbagey fast food. I didn't care if it was processed. I didn't care about the sugar. I didn't care. I worked out. I've always worked out, but I never took care of my diet ever. I just assumed if I work out, that's good enough. And you know, it's amazing the changes. And I haven't done the intermittent fasting, but I gotta ask you this, Ben. So you get these patients with all of these things in there, and they know they need to change. What do you think why is it just they won't give up the change the diet? I mean, what is the thing? Is it not appreciating what could happen in the future because it's not quite bad enough yet? See, for me, that's what it took. I literally got smacked in the face with the second ER visit, and I was horrified. I had another blockage, and I was horrified I was going to go through 9 more months of. Thank goodness it wasn't that bad. It was just an infection. They gave me a antibiotic and cleared it up, but it scared me to death. And from that day forward, I changed completely. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. So you mentioned like the wake up call you get when it finally gets bad enough.
Yeah.
And that's relevant because, a lot of people, that's what it takes to kind of be like, oh, well, now you have diabetes, or oh, now you have a, intestinal blockage, or now you just
Right.
had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Like sometimes those kind of things are a wake up call enough that somebody's like, okay, I guess I'll make some changes. But the thing is, in this modern food environment, it's like pushing a boulder up the hill to try to do anything healthy with your
Yeah.
diet. So I mean,
Yeah.
almost literally every street corner has either a fast food restaurant or a convenience store, which are just completely packed with processed junk food. And that's where a lot of people go when they need a
Yeah.
snack or just need a quick meal or whatever. And even
Right.
once you leave those and go to the actual grocery store, it's still like 3/4 of what's in there is processed junk food.
Right.
Um,
Right.
it might be a slight exaggeration, but
Not much.
yeah. And so once people get used to eating those types of foods, so in case this is too abstract, I'm talking about things like white bread, snack cakes, sugary cereal, Pop Tarts,
Yeah.
cookies,
Yeah.
cakes, popcorn, and a bunch of other, basically any food that comes in either a box
Hmm.
or usually bags and other packages as well, but not every bag. But like anything with a box and a barcode, like
Yeah. So
almost 100% is
so so
processed junk.
so if you leave it on a counter and come back in 5 years and open it up, that's probably not food. It's a food-like substance of some sort.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly the phrase. The phrase is food like substance.
Yeah.
So like most of what people eat nowadays is not really food. Meaning like your great grandparents wouldn't know what it is. They wouldn't recognize
Right.
it. And,
Right.
and so if that's the case, if your ancestors wouldn't recognize it, it's probably not really, it's not a whole food. It's probably not a healthy food, and it's
Right.
part of the problem. But we're surrounded by that stuff. So there's this modern
Yes.
food environment, and that's mainly because the food industry makes tons of money off of getting us hooked on this stuff.
Right.
So I know it's a little bit controversial, but I certainly do think that this type of food is addictive, particularly sugary things, but also other processed carbohydrates. Because one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that processed carbs, in other words, like white flour, almost any kind of flour or potato products and so forth, they turn into sugar right away once you eat them.
Hmm.
So, this author, David Ludwig, I think he's a Harvard professor, he's written a few books. He has this quote that below the neck, your body doesn't know the difference between a bowl of cornflakes with some sugar or a bowl of sugar with some cornflakes, because they're the same thing once they go inside your body.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
that's true of any like processed carb.
Yeah.
It's going to turn into sugar, in other words, glucose in your body quickly. And of course, there's the sweetness aspect, and it's there's some research that suggests that sugar is equally as addictive as hard drugs.
Hmm.
So we've got this food environment where we're surrounded. It's ubiquitous. The processed junk food, the stuff that's made in these factories where who knows what they're doing to it, right? Where it's crushed up and combined in these ways that their food scientists figured out to try to
Right.
make it as palatable as possible with just the right combination and
Right. Right.
doing all these tests. So I think, if people are like, oh yeah, I'd like to improve my health. And then, they every 5 seconds they see McDonald's and they have this craving and they're already hooked on it. And then when they're at the store, they see all these things that they're kind of addicted to, and they're already in their house, and their kids are used to eating them, and so they can't stop buying them, because their kids would complain. And so it's
Right.
just, yeah, it's just this really this momentum that is hard to change in terms
Yeah.
of the way people are eating.
Well, and I agree. It's completely addictive. I know. I lived it. After that, and then when I went to a whole foods diet, I don't eat any processed sugar. I don't eat processed anything in a box. It comes from the vegetable. It comes from the fruits. It comes, the just whole foods, regular. It's addictive. I know it's addictive because I went through the process of going in a grocery store and having to go to the one corner where they actually have real food versus 90% of it that's full of boxes and cans and all kinds of stuff. So I completely concur with that. But let me snap this back to the fasting. So
Mm-hmm.
so what is it? What is it that fasting does in your body that helps combat some of these health issues that you've already mentioned?
Yeah. Yeah, great. I'll address that. So I thought maybe it'd be good to mention just very briefly, kind of like in case anyone's not really familiar with what we mean by intermittent fasting or
Oh,
fasting.
absolutely.
So
Yes, absolutely.
I heard a good definition recently, just a simple way to think about it, which was think about how your ancestors probably ate, and they probably had some kind of dinner before it got dark outside, and then they
Mhm.
didn't eat again till like breakfast, because it's called breakfast for a reason, right? Break fast.
Right.
So if you just think about stopping eating before it gets dark outside,
Uh-huh.
and then not eating till 8 or 9 in the morning, that already is quite a bit longer than most people go without eating. So you've got the sleep
Oh,
time, but you're going to
sure.
add a few extra hours if you stop after dinner or stop before dark.
Right.
So that's going to turn into, instead of just the 8 hours of sleep, now you're going to get the 8 hours of sleep plus a few more hours, and probably get up to 12 or 14 or 15 hours of not eating anything. So
Uh-huh.
that's just a way to put it in perspective, and an easy
Okay.
way to think about it, I guess,
Yeah.
that I thought was kind of helpful. But why does fasting help with these health problems, or why does it help in this junk food environment that we've been talking about? Well, it kind of goes back to that diabetes thing, and specifically what's called insulin resistance, or
Okay.
excess insulin. Technical term would be hyperinsulinemia. So there's this hormone called insulin. It's extremely important, because it is the biggest regulator of your blood sugar, and also a huge regulator of fat storage. So it has a lot to do with
Mm.
energy storage and things like that. So every time you eat any food with carbohydrates, especially processed carbs and sugar, insulin goes up. In other words, your pancreas pumps this insulin out into your bloodstream so that it can go all around your body and start pushing sugar into muscle cells and fat cells. So it wants to get that sugar out of your bloodstream. So it's got to put it somewhere, it pushes it into those two types of cells. And so
Okay.
it makes your fat cells grow. So it's like
Yeah.
fertilizer for fat cells. So anyway,
Uh,
insulin goes high when we eat that kind of food. And so since people tend to eat processed food all the time, several times throughout the day, then insulin is spiking, 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 and it's just chronically high. It's high all the time. And so when you
right.
have too much of something, any hormone, whether it's insulin or almost any other hormone, your body says, hey, there's too much. I got to turn down the signal. So it's like if the music's too loud, you're like, oh, I got to turn it down. This is too much. Or I got to put in
Mm-hmm.
earplugs. So it says,
Mm-hmm.
no, I can't listen to all this insulin. So it kind of gets rid of some of the receptors, or starts making it so the receptors don't work as well. So it's turning down the volume. So you get what's called insulin resistance. In other words, insulin is high, it's excessively high, but your body's not really responding to it as well anymore. And
Oh,
so as a result, lots of things happen. Insulin resistance has been linked to almost every chronic disease. It
wow.
either causes or significantly contributes to, let's list a
Mm-hmm.
few. Diabetes, of course. It's basically literally the cause. The definition of diabetes is having high insulin and high blood sugar, type 2 diabetes specifically. But insulin resistance is also linked to heart problems, heart attacks, strokes, dementia like Alzheimer's, infertility related to things like polycystic ovary syndrome, and the list could go on and on. But those are just a few, to kind of whet the appetite. But there's this book called Why We Get Sick. It was written
Mm-hmm.
by Ben Bickman. He's a PhD researcher about insulin and other things. And he basically was able to connect, using physiology, was able to connect insulin resistance to almost literally like 90, whatever percent, almost every chronic lifestyle illness that we have been seeing more of these days.
That's
So
crazy.
there's this thing called insulin resistance. It contributes to almost every kind of health problem that people are having, including obesity, of course. I didn't even mention that, but that's like almost
Seems
a given.
Obvious, yeah.
Because remember, insulin, what it does is it makes people fatter, because it like one of its targets is the fat cells. So, so the way to kind of change insulin resistance, there are basically two ways to do it, right? You could change the type of food that you're eating, which would be like what you did, right? Which is saying like, oh, instead of this processed junk food, oh, I'm going to eat some real food, whole foods kind of thing.
Right.
Not the store Whole Foods, important distinction, because they do have a lot of junk food in that store.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Just because it's gluten-free and organic doesn't mean it's healthy. So you got to look at what's actually in it. So, but yeah, whole foods as in real food. So that, and sometimes taking it a little further, like if you're no longer able to process carbohydrates effectively, then sometimes taking away all the carbohydrates, and which is what we would call a ketogenic diet or a very low carbohydrate diet, is another way to effectively combat insulin resistance and all the things that come from insulin resistance. Or you can do both. Obviously, you can change your diet and do fasting, but the alternative is to eat less frequently. And when you eat less frequently, then your body has these intervals where it can let the insulin kind of start coming down and the blood sugars coming down. And then after a while, it has a chance to kind of start fixing and correcting some of those issues related to the insulin resistance. So the insulin level will be lower and you won't be as resistant to it after a while if you do some time restricted eating, which is like that daily fasting, a little bit of fasting each day, or you can sometimes reverse it more quickly by doing a few longer fasts here and there.
Okay. So, I think you may have experienced some initial apprehension from some people about fasting. I know after I lost 45 pounds, I'd have people say, "Oh my gosh, you look completely different. What did you do? I need to do it." And I say, "Well, I don't eat sugar and I don't eat processed foods anymore." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, okay, that's great. That ain't gonna work for me. Go buy my diet pill." So
nobody wants to do that.
nobody wants to do that. But so can you go over like just some of the most common questions and the concerns like you get from people when you try and explain? Because I mean, that value looks incredible. I mean, if you're pre-diabetic or if you're way over, this seems almost like, I mean, don't want to say anything's a silver bullet, but goodness gracious, it seems like it's one of the best things you can do. So what are some of the common questions or concerns you get related to the fasting?
Yeah. And just to reiterate, I mean, I guess if you were to take eating real food and doing some fasting here and there, like that combined is pretty much a quote unquote silver bullet. It could get rid of more than half of the health problems we're dealing with these days, at least in the United States. So, but yeah, to answer your question, so common objection. So the biggest thing is just people think we've been so conditioned since about the 1980s that we need to eat all the time.
Right.
We've been, and of course the food industry has every incentive to get us to think that, right? To think, oh, you need to eat quote unquote healthy snacks throughout the day. That's how you lose weight, which makes no sense at all once you start thinking about it. But like, that's what we've been brainwashed to think, that the way to lose weight is to eat snacks all day long. So I mean, if you just stop and think about that,
it's insanity.
Yeah. So the food industry has huge power, huge lobbying power. So they have a big impact on research that's done and like the outcomes of the research. Because when people look at it after the fact, they find that, research that's funded by the food industry much more frequently agrees with kind of, the conclusions that would support that. Or like Coca-Cola was secretly funding this guy that, he did the Twinkie diet. So so this was a thing like 10 years ago. So he lost like 100 pounds on the Twinkie diet. As allegedly, at least, I don't know if he was literally, but so basically he was just eating these snack cakes but he was cutting calories. That was the idea. That he was like
Uh-huh.
he had reduced his calories versus what he had been eating previously, but he was literally just eating snack cakes
Oh my
and supposedly
gosh.
lost like 100 pounds or something. And he wrote about it, and the article kind of went viral like 10 years ago. So a lot of people don't remember
Right.
this, um, but it came out after the fact. Coca-Cola was funding his project. So
Unbelievable.
Coca-Cola was trying to influence us indirectly to think that calories are the only thing that matter.
Oh my
Doesn't matter how much
gosh.
sugar you consume and things like that. So the food industry has the clear connection to the government. They do all sorts of lobbying. They do some research that we know about. They do some things that we don't know about. And they have a lot of power, and they're trying to persuade us to eat all the time. So I guess the reason I bring that up is to just kind of indirectly answer your question, which is, it feels like since the 80s is about when it became like, it seemed like the right answer to like, oh, I need to eat small frequent meals. And of course the low fat craze was part of this, like,
Sure,
which
sure.
turned out was terrible advice to try to
Right,
eat low fat all the time.
right.
That goes hand in hand with it. But like, people have grown up. So anyone under the age of 30 or maybe even 40 has grown up with this constant message that you need to eat all the time. And of course, the constant availability of very pleasing, hyperpalatable food.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, which has gotten more and more entrenched. So the biggest objection to fasting is just like, oh, that seems unnatural.
Right, right.
And yes, it seems unnatural in this modern food environment that's only existed for about 50 years. But how much of human history is that? It's like much, much less than 1%.
Not
So it's
even an
just
eye
this.
blink.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's the biggest objection, is just like, oh, this doesn't seem like a normal thing to do. Well,
Right.
yeah, if you look around.
Ah, there's
Yeah.
no doubt. You know what? And again, I can only reflect back on me because I mean, there was a period where I was 245 pounds. I'm down to like 197 pounds now. And that you're just surrounded by it everywhere. And, in now I'm so over it. I don't even, I haven't been in a fast food restaurant in 7, 8 months. It doesn't even phase me anymore. But I
Hmm.
guarantee you, when I first started and I'm driving down the road after a day of work and there it's sitting, to keep on driving and not to go in there. I mean, it's everywhere. It's everywhere, enticing you for whether it's stopping to get a milkshake or a full meal or a whatever. It's all over the place. So
Yeah, you make a good point that, like, if you first make a dietary change like that and start cutting out some of the processed foods, it's like any addiction. You're
yeah,
gonna have withdrawals, and you're gonna
yeah.
have these frequent cravings, and
Mm-hmm.
then as time goes on, they'll get less frequent and more manageable. So yeah, like, the modern food environment versus, think about what some of our ancestors did, 100 years ago or 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago, or like
Right,
however long,
right.
I don't know. But in other words, they didn't have a refrigerator or a grocery store or a fast food restaurant, and so they had to
Right.
go out and find food in many cases. And as a result, not only would they do this so-called intermittent fasting, where they wouldn't eat, after dinner or something until sometime the next morning, but they would sometimes have to go a day or two without food. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
actually the normal human activity. So
Right.
that's what our bodies got used to through evolution and things like that. And so that's a big objection to fasting. I guess the next one would probably be, I'm going to get hangry, like that they just think that they're not going to feel good or be able to
Right.
focus. And
Start taking it out on their family and friends and throw their
yeah.
computer at work or something.
Yeah, and it turns out that's actually kind of just related to all this processed junk food, because
Mm,
people get into this cycle where they're all, every hour, let's say, or every 2 hours or whatever. It varies a little
right.
bit, but pretty frequently people are either having a meal or a snack, that has a lot of sugar in it, or a lot of processed carbs, which I mentioned earlier just turn into sugar right away in your body. So it's the same thing. Um, and so they get these blood sugar spikes. And when they get this blood sugar spike, the insulin follows. So insulin goes up when the blood sugar goes up. You get an insulin spike. And then they both come crashing down. So about an hour after these processed food type meals or snacks, people tend to feel hungrier as a result of the food that they ate before that. So because their blood sugar actually goes slightly below the kind of normal baseline when it comes crashing down. So they get these cravings and they feel like, oh, I can't focus and I'm not feeling good. And so I got to go, what do I need? I need more of the same thing, that I had an hour ago. Some more of these potato chips or, any number of other things. So that, like the feeling of hanger is actually more related to the junk food that people eat than to the activity of not eating. And when you start doing some kind of fasting, like the hunger, it doesn't keep getting more and more. Like sure, the first half a day, but actually, there's some different hormones involved, and one of them is called ghrelin, and it's known as the hunger hormone. It's a little bit lesser known. It's kind of a recent topic that people are talking about, but ghrelin is this hunger hormone, and it goes up and down each day and stuff. But what they've shown is that when people do fasting, the longer you fast, the lower your ghrelin gets overall. So your hunger hormone goes down, and there's a bunch of other changes. That's just kind of an oversimplification, but in my experience, the longer you fast, the less hungry you are, basically, as in like those, what we kind of think of as hunger now, like, oh, I can't focus, so I got to go eat and stuff like that. The longer you go, kind of the better it gets, meaning like sometimes when I do a slightly prolonged fast, like a couple days, a few days, something like that, you get less and less hungry, not more and more hungry. But yeah, I understand in like the 2-hour short term, people are like, oh, I'm going to be hangry or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, so I think those are the biggest two objections. There's a million others. Some people think it might be unhealthy just because, again, we've been conditioned to think that we need to eat all the time and that somehow, our bodies are going to implode or that our metabolism is going to crash or that something terrible is going to happen if we go more than a few hours without eating.
Right. It's funny when you describe that second thing, it almost sounds like a drug addict who takes a hit and then it wears off, and then what do they need? They got to get another one and another and another. Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yep.
So Ben, tell me, so let's get real practical here. So if I wanted to break into this, or someone listening wants to start fasting, like now they've never done it, say, or maybe if they did it, it was just one little thing. So if you were going to advise us, how would you incorporate fasting into a lifestyle? What I found is if these little fad hits here and there, they don't work. I mean, there's so many pills and diet plans and things you can buy. So if we wanted to make this like a lifestyle, but break in slowly, how would you get it done? What would you tell a beginner how to do that?
Yeah, well, first of all, start slow. Don't go from 0 to 60 overnight. Think of the opposite of a New Year's resolution.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably a good thing.
The New Year's resolution is, oh man, I'm so excited, I'm going to make all these changes, and it lasts for 2 days, right?
Right.
Yeah,
we all been there.
So let's do the opposite of that by picking something that's easy and sustainable, and then gradually building on it. But I think probably the best first step. Well, there's a couple first steps that you could take. So it's like dealer's choice, let's say.
Okay.
But one of them would be to switch out some of the food you're eating, some of the processed food you're eating, with unprocessed food. Now, does that make you do fasting? No, not necessarily. But the point is, it starts to gradually make some of the same positive effects in your body that fasting would eventually do. And so it's kind of like easing you into it. So you're not going to have such crazy fluctuations in your blood sugar and your insulin and things like that if you start switching out some of the processed junk food with things that, again, your ancestors would recognize as food. So that can be all sorts of things, but just anything that's not like ground up and crushed up in a factory and sold in a box, basically. So that's one possible first step, is just to at least change out part of what you're eating with whole foods. But if you just wanted to focus on the fasting and just ignore the diet, I think the first step would be to stop snacking.
Okay.
So in other words, focus on your meals. You can still have 3 meals if you want: breakfast, lunch, dinner. But if you were to just remove the snacks, then you're already doing intermittent fasting.
Sure.
And that's because, again, if you're like a typical dinner time is maybe like 7 p.m. So if you didn't eat after dinner until breakfast, that would probably be at least 12 hours.
Sure. Yeah.
give or take a little bit. And for some
Mm-hmm.
people, it'd be more like 14 hours. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
already what some people often call intermittent fasting. It's just
Okay.
that like kind of time restricted eating or fasting overnight and just pushing it a little bit longer. So I
Right,
think the
right.
very first step, and what I would advise someone to do if they want to try it out, is just to try going without snacks, but eat good quality, satisfying meals with healthy fats, high quality protein, etc. Don't just have some little skimpy meal where you're trying to cut calories or something. Don't
Right,
worry about calories at all.
right.
Just have a good breakfast, good lunch, good dinner, and then see if you can. And even if you can't go the whole day without snacks, maybe just try it between breakfast and lunch or between lunch and dinner. And then when you're ready, try it after dinner until breakfast the next day without snacks.
Right. Okay. So so let's take it one step further. Let's say I'll just use myself as example. I'm on a whole foods diet, but I don't and sometimes I might eat after dark. I don't ever snack really because what I've found on a whole foods diet is I don't ever feel the need to snack. And if I am snacking, um what tends to happen is I'll grab a handful of nuts or maybe a apple or some other fruit and all of a sudden I'm good. Yeah, so if it was somebody beyond just these basic tools you've given, what would somebody who's a more intermediate faster? What are some examples like to a next level once you get past that intermediate level?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's good to take it one step at a time. So like I said a few minutes ago, like just kind of keep it easy, gradually build on it. So once you've mastered the art of not snacking, then you'd be ready to move on to
Mhm.
kind of the next step. And there's no rush. Like it doesn't mean like 2 days without snacks and then you got to try something else. Like go a few weeks or a month or two, and then
Right.
let your body adapt a little bit so don't have as many growing pains as you work through it.
Hmm.
But once you're ready, um, basically the next step in most cases would be to just shorten your eating window a little bit to see how that works for you. So, for example, if you've been doing the no snacks, but you have breakfast at 8 a.m. and dinner at 7 p.m., so you've been eating between about 8 a.m. and let's say 8 p.m. because maybe you take a while to finish dinner or whatever. So
Hmm.
that's like a 12-hour eating window.
Right.
So you would take that 12 hours that you've now kind of gotten used to, and you might shorten it a little bit to 11 or 10 hours. And so the way to do that naturally would be to eat breakfast a little later or to eat dinner a little earlier.
Mm.
Or, you might consider just skipping one of those meals altogether, but then you would like spread the other two meals out. But let's just keep it
Right.
simpler where you would just delay breakfast or eat dinner a little earlier. And so you could play around with that. If you've done 12-hour eating windows for a while, maybe you put it to 10 for a month, 10-hour eating window every day for a month, or maybe not every day, maybe 5 days a week. There's different ways to do it. You don't have to be like exactly the same every day necessarily.
Right.
Uh, but that would kind of be the next step. And that's just what we call time restricted eating, which is sometimes called intermittent fasting, but kind of a more accurate term is time restricted eating, where you're just kind of shortening the eating window on a daily or maybe every a few days a week or whatever
Right.
basis. Yeah.
Excellent. So how long then does it take to start realistically feeling better? We so many of these diet pills and such. Oh, you'll lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks or whatever. So realistically, if someone would start into intermittent fasting, what are some of the health benefits they're going to start feeling, in the short term after they get over? I'm like you mentioned, there's this hump where you got to get over the withdrawal of all of this garbage
Yeah.
that's been shoveled in the body. But what do you think on the benefit side? How long does that usually take?
Yeah. Great question. So, of course, people want, I mean, what the benefits that they're usually looking for, it's either they're trying to lose weight, which is probably the most common one, like the
Mm-hmm.
reason people start doing things like this, or they had that kind of wake up call we talked about at the beginning, like, oh no, my diabetes got really bad. I had to
Right.
go to the emergency room again. I guess I better make some changes.
Right.
Um, so if you're looking to lose weight, you want to do it fast, but it's probably better to just take your time. Uh,
Mm-hmm. For
and
sure.
for all the reasons that I mentioned, like if you rush into something like fasting and just do a whole bunch, it's going to be more difficult, and you haven't gotten kind of mentally adapted or physically adapted to a new lifestyle. So you're probably going to just be doing a sprint and then giving up after a short time because you're like, this is too difficult. This is too difficult.
Right.
So, and the same thing's kind of true with something like blood sugar, but it actually doesn't take very much fasting to improve your blood sugar. So I'll contrast those two, like weight loss and improving your blood sugar, which is related to diabetes, of course.
Right.
So the weight loss is usually kind of like has some ups and downs, and it's kind of a gradual dropping off, once people start doing fasting. And some of the people really experienced with this say women take a little longer at first to start dropping off the pounds. So to put it in perspective, it's the first 6 weeks or so where the women are kind of usually not losing weight as fast as they want. And then they kind of pick up some steam if they keep going. But it's just really a bad idea to focus on weight loss every single day, because there are hormonal changes, especially with, the monthly cycle, but also just other things that happen every day where our weight goes up and down for lots of different reasons. So people get really myopic and they get really focused on weight loss. So if you're trying to lose weight, it will definitely happen, but you got to stick with things for not only a few weeks, but a few months to kind of give your body a proper adaptation to let your weight have some of those ups and downs, those little ups and downs, but working in the right general direction. So you really got to think in months rather than days if you're talking about weight loss. Now, to kind of contrast that, if you have high blood sugar, there was one study. So people with advanced type 2 diabetes are often on insulin, where they're injecting insulin. We think of that with type 1 diabetes, but if you have really advanced type 2 diabetes, doctors will often prescribe some insulin to inject. So there was one study where people started doing a 24-hour fast. It was either once or twice a week. So now I'm kind of forgetting, but well, just think about it as either once a week or twice a week. Either way, that's not like super extreme. And within just a few weeks, they were completely off their insulin. Now, this was a relatively small study with like 10 or 20 people. It wasn't like some huge randomized controlled trial, but it was just like a proof of concept that it only takes a little bit of fasting to get you off insulin if you're on insulin in the case of type 2 diabetes, and to have some pretty noteworthy improvements in blood sugar. Now, I'll caveat that blood sugar can have some ups and downs too when people first start fasting, where they're like, wait a minute, I haven't eaten in a whole day and my blood sugar is really high. And sometimes it'll do that just because you're going through all these different changes internally. But if you stick with it for a few weeks, you'll see a big improvement in blood sugar, I would believe.
That's powerful. That really is. Okay, I got one last question. It's more personal. So I go to the gym. I'll affectionately call them some of the meatheads that I lift weights with. They would freak out if I said, "Oh, you got to eat 6-7 times. You're not getting enough calories to build muscle if you if you're intermittent fasting." What would you say to someone like that who would argue that you can't really work out? You need the calories to work out, and if you don't do that, you're not gonna build muscle. Is there truth to balancing that out when you're in the gym or not? What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and kind of brings up a good point that it depends on the demographic. It depends on your goals. What are your goals? So if you're ripped, shredded, lean, and you're trying to build more muscle, then it's debatable. It's debatable whether fasting is a good tool for you or not. And it may not be optimal for building the maximum amount of muscle, though in some cases it works really well for getting shredded, meaning like getting rid of that subcutaneous body fat. Hugh Jackman famously did that when he was preparing for some of the Wolverine movies, to just kind of look extra, ripped or whatever. He did the time restricted eating or intermittent fasting. So you can find articles about that online really easily. But if you're like just trying to build as much muscle as possible, I would say, then don't go crazy with the fasting. You could certainly do a little bit of time restricted eating, and that wouldn't necessarily hurt your progress too much. But you probably wouldn't want to fast for 5 days in a row if your main goal is to build lots of muscle. But let's make it a little more realistic. So that the bodybuilders are a pretty small subset of the population.
Yes, they are.
So there's, but if we're talking about someone who's actually pretty overweight,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they're strong and maybe they like lifting weights, but they have a lot of extra body fat,
Mm-hmm.
um, then it's definitely worth it for the health benefits to do some fasting in that scenario,
Right.
because it's not like you're going to lose all your muscle. That's one of those old wives' tales. You're not going to lose all
Uh-huh.
your muscle, and you can actually keep doing some light workouts while you fast,
Uh-huh.
especially if you keep your electrolytes up, salt in particular,
Right.
um, it, in general. But for those kind of people, which is most people that
Mm-hmm.
are not a bodybuilder, maybe they like to work out, maybe they don't, but they have extra body fat. That's where fasting has a ton of benefit and can help prevent a lot of these medical problems that we've been talking about.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, and I think you've enlightened us so much on this. I think I've never actually I've never paid attention to when I eat even on a whole foods diet, I never count calories in a whole foods diet. If it's a fruit or a vegetable, I just eat it. I don't ever and I don't overeat it, because I'm not going to sit and eat 5 plates of lettuce and carrots. You get full and you just don't want to eat anymore. But I've never thought, like, when I eat, I just, breakfast, lunch, and dinner is pretty much when I eat, and grab a snack here and there of a apple or an orange or whatever. But I, but this is, I'm actually going to give this a shot and pay attention to when I'm eating, because I think the benefits are awesome. But so Ben, so tell us a little bit about, how people who want to follow you, where they can maybe get in touch with you or see the things you're writing, or newsletters, whatever you got available to you.
Yeah, so I have a website. It's fastingwell.com. So I started that last year in 2020, and I've written a lot of articles or blog posts on there. And I have an email newsletter, which is where I would encourage people to go. You can basically go to the homepage. There's a few other places where you could sign up as well,
Okay.
and sign up for the email newsletter. I do have a freebie that I'm offering there. I think by the time this airs, it'll probably be what I call an intermittent fasting checklist, which is
Awesome.
just kind of like all the things you need to be aware of or consider before you start intermittent fasting.
Perfect.
But maybe even more importantly, just in the emails themselves, I kind of have uh, a sequence of emails that kind of walks you through step by step how to get started. And then I'm always kind of periodically sending out new information and things to
Excellent.
to people that are on the email newsletter. So, and I am planning to start a podcast. Probably
Oh,
won't be
very
as polished
cool.
as this one at
Oh,
first,
geez,
but
please.
it's tentatively scheduled for mid-October this year,
Very
2021,
nice.
to
Very
start that.
cool.
Yep.
Well, congrats on that. So yeah, everybody, by the way, I'll put a link to Ben's website down below, in the comments area. So please, go and check it out. I mean, the science is behind this. Our country's just at an epidemic of I'll just say it, fatness. We are just too fat. We
Yeah.
are. I mean, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but we're not eating right. We're not taking care of our bodies. We're putting things inside of our bodies that in many ways are poisonous, and they're not good for us. And, it's causing people to get sick and die before they need to die. We need to pay attention to this stuff, because it's that important. So Ben, I want to thank you once again for coming out here and sharing that knowledge with us. It's been great.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was a fun conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Ben, we're done. There we go. I think that went really well. I'll just make sure I edit out that one little chunk there
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
obviously,
we
yeah.
that we got stuck. But yeah, no, I think this will go really well. Such a good conversation. Hey, I got one question for you. I have a
Uh-huh.
son who's been on keto for like going on not quite 8 years, probably 6 years now. He's skinny as a rail. Is that a good long term health thing? I mean, because he doesn't like he won't eat fruit,
Hmm.
because in the keto he says that fruit and sugar is the same as eating sugar from, and I'm like, no, it is not. It's not the same.
Uh-huh.
I mean, is that healthy? And he'll hardly eat a vegetable. Vegetables are supposed to be okay in keto as long as you keep the carbs down, but he doesn't like to eat that either. I mean, is that a good lifestyle?
Gotcha.
I worry about just the fixation on the meat and the fats for all the time.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so I think it depends on who you ask. So, is keto healthy long term? that's hard to answer because there's not like any really, really long-term studies that look at that. Can you get nutrition just from, mostly meat or whatever? It kind of depends. So like we're out of the habit of eating organ meats, but certain organ meats have tons of nutrition. Like the liver is like the more nutritious than any vegetable, for example.
Really? Wow.
So I have no idea if your son eats a variety of different stuff. Yeah. But even with all that, now some people swear by the so-called carnivore diet just because they feel like taking out the plants like removes certain inflammatory effects and other problems and helps their mental health and all this stuff. Right. So there's a whole contingent of people that are like, oh, carnivore is the way to go, at least for them personally. Yeah. So it's a little bit subjective or personal, but I think for the majority of people having like you can be on keto and you can use some non-starchy vegetables. So not the potatoes or the sweet potatoes. Right. And you can still stay in ketosis fairly easily, especially if you're doing some exercise. And you can even have, well, at least berries. Berries are relatively low in sugar compared to other fruits. So having some berries and having some leafy greens and a few other vegetables, it's very doable, and you can do it on a ketogenic diet. So I think it would be reasonable to at least try it out if he hasn't already, to kind of swing back the other way a little bit and just see like, oh, can I introduce a few of these things, the ones that are lower in sugar, and still, maintain this ketogenic diet?
Yeah, we were out there. He lives in San Diego, and we're out there, and every morning the bacon's frying, and it's like the grease is. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't be eating that all that. He swears, and I mean he's healthy, but I worry about the long term of like going so extreme and not eating any fruits and any vegetables,
certain nutrients.
That's the thing that always worries me. But anyway, so
interesting.
But all right, well, good deal, Ben. Well, I'm going to let you go. I think we hit a little bit longer than right, but hey, no, we had till 12.
Oh, we finished right around 10:30.
Yeah, so that worked out.
That's not bad at all.
About a perfect timing. So again, thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to meet you. Good luck with your podcast too. Hope it goes great for you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
All right.
Thanks for your time. All
right,
bye.
Have a good one. Bye.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the podcast today. I so hope you found value in the topic today. Every single day, if we can expand our perspective just a little bit on any range of topic, whether it be about our physical body, intellectual sharpness and perspective, or spiritual growth, then if we stay consistent in the long run, we all become more well-rounded people able to cope with all manner of events in life. I always appreciate you clicking like or follow to this podcast. Generally, a new episode is published every single week. And please, if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear about them. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week until we talk again.